Hello everyone, Arlisha here and welcome to this week's video. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the process of creating this gouache portrait. This was originally recorded as the real-time video for my YouTube members and my patrons over on Patreon. This was recorded as a tutorial, so in this video I was walking them through my entire process between explaining how I use reference images and how I build a sketch, how I lay down my colors, and how I carve out a painting. So if you're interested in more information about the specifics of every step, you're welcome to check out either of those places if you'd like to see the full real-time process. I think the whole video was like an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, and we started by assessing our reference image and talking a bit about composition and how we were going to lay things out. And then I walked them through the process of sketching and painting. The finished piece is also going to be used as the Patreon postcard for the month of July. So those are already, in the works, good to go. It's too late to sign up for this Patreon postcard now, but I do make new ones every month. So you can check that out if you're interested. For this painting, I am trying out for the first time Gouache by Nevskaya Palitra, which is the same company that makes White Nights watercolors, which if you've been around this channel, you'll know that my White Nights watercolors are one of my most favorite watercolors to use. I love them so much, and a very, very kind patron actually sent me this gouache, and it was one of the most special experiences of my artistic career, receiving that, not just the gift, but the card that was sent along with it. So if you're watching this, thank you so much. You really did make my day and my family's as well. It's such a humbling honor to find that the things that I do and my presence means something to people. It's interesting because it's always the goal to make meaningful content and not just paint something or not just talk about products, but to create a safe place for people to be. That's always the goal, but it doesn't make it any less amazing and rewarding and humbling when I hear bits of ways that that's true and that it's actually happening. So it will definitely feel extra special every time I sit down to use this gouache because the gesture was so personal and so kind. Moving back to talking about this painting as a whole, while I was recording this video, I was talking about the goal being to carve out the deepest points of shadow first, in the same way that you would build a sculpture. So if you took a lump of clay and you kind of carved out the overall head shape first, that's what I did. And then you might go in and, create the craters of the eye socket and form the nose, or those sorts of things. Again, it's funny because I'm not actually a sculptor, so that could be completely wrong, but I think the metaphor still works pretty well. And it's nice with gouache because you're working with a more opaque medium. You can go in with those darker values first. And sometimes that means just omitting the light areas. And sometimes it means knowing that you can paint over top of things later on. I tend to like to work with my darker values first, not always with gouache. Sometimes I start with mid-tone values and then carve into them a little bit later, which ultimately I did end up doing something like that here. But it's a lot of fun with gouache because you can always go back and tweak edges and make things a little darker or a little deeper, and you can brighten areas up. I've really been enjoying laying in a wash of color and then building on top of that with less saturated colors. So I laid down this sort of lime neon green first, a watercolor wash, and then I'm building on top of that. I find that working in this way is a really fun and relatively simple way to keep a cohesive color scheme, because even though this gouache is opaque, that green is going to peek through basically everywhere. So I worked with a color scheme that's a little bit more analogous, not completely of course, but working with those greens and blues and the colors in that area of the color wheel generally tends to be my favorite way to build a color palette, working with colors that are, close to one another. This video is definitely not a review of this particular brand of gouache. This is the first time I've used it. I mostly just wanted to sit down and share this process with you. It's been a little while since I've taken the time to sit down and paint with an opaque medium. I've been falling back on watercolors a lot lately, partly because I haven't had a ton of time to explore new concepts and try new things. So I've been relying on what comes a little bit easier to me. But as things are starting to settle and there's a bit more breathing room in the world around me and in my life, I'm able to start to ask questions again and try bits of things. So it may not seem like this is that different because it's a portrait and it's in gouache, which is something that I'm relatively familiar with, but it's a step back into exploration, which is really exciting for me. I found myself feeling almost nostalgic about the parts of the process of working with gouache that I haven't experienced for a little while, Like I knew the exact moment, which we're just coming out of now. I knew the exact moment in the painting when I had reached the quote unquote ugly stage, which I talked about before as mostly just being the point in a painting where you've lost a lot of contrast. So a lot of the values are very similar and usually sitting in a light to mid-tone range, and things are all kind of blending together, and it can be really easy to lose sight of the structure. And it was actually comforting to reach that stage because I'm like, yes, here it is, here we are. And I knew what to do next. I knew that the next step was going to be to reintroduce contrast, which is carving deeper into those shadow shapes, the areas that are even further back in that sort of sculpture analogy. So the shadows that are cast and the depth of the eye sockets, things like that, the crease of the mouth, and that can really bring a painting that seems muddy and indistinct out when you either increase the depth by adding more darkness or just add more lighter values, just playing that game of finding a balance of values. Great way to get out of the quote unquote ugly stage with gouache. As I sit here, I'm reminded of a time when a lot of the things that are happening in this painting right now would have just seemed like ugly to me as a younger artist or someone who was still learning. Like when I was first learning about gouache and when I was first experimenting with it, I wanted every layer when it was finished to be completely matte and opaque. I have a lot of streakiness here and a lot of more transparent layers, and I'm just combining those different levels of opacity and different levels of saturation, and that's something that I really enjoy now at this point, but I definitely remember that would have just made me think that the painting was unfinished in the past, and it's a really liberating thing to have allowed my art to mean whatever I want it to mean. And that is something that has definitely taken me a lot of time to get to, but to go, it doesn't have to, be completely fine-tuned, pristine layers of paint in order for the painting to be finished. It just creates such a narrow, limited view of what a painting is, and there are a lot of things that I've created that wouldn't exist if I had held myself to that rigid standard in the past. It's just not something that creates art that I look back on and am very pleased with. I know, and that's a beautiful thing about the unique nature of the artistic journey for everyone, is what makes art satisfactory to you is going to vary. There are always fundamental principles that make art of a higher skill, I suppose, like having a range of values, understanding color theory and composition and anatomy, and those things matter, of course, but there is a point where you just have to go, is this what I wanted? Art is a very emotionally and creatively founded skill, and if it's not ticking those boxes, if it's not meeting those needs in the creation process, at least for me, that's been my experience, I often question, like, why am I doing this instead of something else if I'm not going to be connecting with the art in that way? So over time, my gestures, my brushstrokes have just become more intuitive and loose, and ensure that I'm breaking some rules and not making the most technically proficient art that I could be. But I love what I'm doing, and that is a race that I want to run. That is a path that I want to explore. Thank you all so much for hanging out with me as we take a journey on another painting. I love just sitting down and talking about things like this and sharing a bit of where my brain is at during the creative process. Again, if you'd like to see the real-time version of this painting, you're more than welcome to check out YouTube memberships or Patreon for the real-time tutorial version of this painting. As always, a huge, massive thank you to those members and my patrons over on Patreon for your support. This is the new list of July's producers. So all of the people who were pledged at that tier for the month of July, thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone watching for hanging out with me and for making it to the end of this video. I will see you all next time. Bye bye.